The topic of this video is authentic cycling, and along with that, I want to talk about the use of flat pedals, particularly in the off-season. The most authentic way to pedal the bike is to not necessarily focus on the bottom or the back of the pedal stroke. And in fact, I'll make the argument as I talk here that there's very little difference between cycling and running if we look at the expression of power or force. What I'm saying basically is that the human body, I believe, has one way to produce power. That there is one way in which the body, that all of us as human beings, can express that power application or force application. And what are sort of some archaic or just haphazard drawings that I hope will show you or give you a basic idea of what I'm talking about. Here on the right we can see the basic stick figure of a runner, and I've drawn a circle to reflect the movement of a pendulum, and along with that I would refer to the active.com article on the Kikuyu women that was just recently published, as well as other supporting documents that you have access to. But in that article I talk about these Kenyan women and the fact that optimal running is in effect sort of an upside down pendulum where we have the exchange of potential and kinetic energy, and the maintenance of that and the lack of a pause at the top of the arc. And we minimize that pause, or the Kikuyu women minimize it, by being very stable, having excellent posture, and having minimal loss of energy at their feet. And where I want to make basically the reference here in comparing running to cycling, when we look at the runner and we look at what running is, we know that when we make contact with the ground, we put force into the ground. That we define as extension of the hip as the leg moves back behind the body, and the primary extensors of the hip are of course the glute in combination with the hamstring working synergistically with the glute. And if we go over here to this cyclist, and here we've got a cyclist and it's sort of a rudimentary stick figure, and where we show the cyclist in the aerodynamic position. But the comparison I want to make here is, for all intents and purposes, the only difference that I want to look at today or recognize between cycling and running is the idea that the ground, and in this case the ground for the cyclist is the pedal, that the cyclist is able to engage this pedal earlier than we engage the ground in running. And we can see here that in this particular instance the cyclist is engaging the pedal at about 1 to 2 o'clock if we think of this circle as a clock face. And from that point the cyclist pushes down. That motion is largely extension of the knee, which is a quad dominant motion. So we can look at cycling and say that it's more quad dominant than glute dominant, but the reason is, as I'm pointing out, the fact that the pedal is to be engaged much earlier than the ground would be in running. Where the problem occurs, in my opinion, is this myth. I think it's a bit of a myth that exists that when we reach the bottom of the pedal stroke we should pull up or focus on that scraping mud off the bottom of our shoe, as Lyman said many years ago. And when that happens, I think we turn this motion of pedaling the bike into one where at the back of the pedal stroke we're focusing too much on the front of our hip, the hip flexors, all of the hip flexors, and there's a lot of them, TFL, quad, and even the sartorius, iliacus, psoas, what have you. I mean, all of the front of the hip those muscles are, for the most part, they're not prime movers. Those of you that have been through our analysis, you know we differentiate, and when we look at the body, the larger muscle groups that tend to be a little bit more superficial are the prime movers in our shoulders, the deltoid, the lat to some degree, although that's also a stabilizer, the quads, the glutes. These are prime movers, the muscles that move us from one place to the next. And basically, we don't want to look at the front of the hip as being an area where we generate propulsion. So one of the reasons why I tend to minimize the use of running drills when talking about running mechanics is this idea that when I'm doing a high knee drill or a butt kick drill, those drills tend to reinforce this idea that as I drive my knee, that action should come from the hip flexors and that should be a way in which we move ourselves, when in truth, the flexion of the hip as our leg is swinging through the gait cycle is a reactive motion on the heels of applying force to the ground and our leg moving backward and the front of our hip being open and allowing for a full extension of the leg all the way through. And the more open the front of our hip is, the more flexibility and mobility we have in the hip, the longer the foot can stay in the ground, the more the calf posterior chain stretches, the faster the leg swings through. So that swing through is in reaction to force into the ground, not in action by the hip flexors. Similarly, in cycling, the more force we put into the pedal in the downward phase of the stroke, the more we can keep the momentum through the back of the pedal stroke and minimize the dead spot at the top of the stroke. And of course, our fit on the bike plays into this as well. I don't want to get into that discussion right now. What I'm basically saying here and where I'm going is one way that we can train this authentic pattern is to pedal with flat pedals. Now, by a flat pedal, I simply mean for you as a cyclist not to be connected to your pedal via a clipless pedal system. You know, we can think basically, if we go way back to the introduction of clipless pedals, whenever the heck that was, we thought we were making an improvement to cycling. And I'm not going to stand here and make an argument that you're faster without a clipless pedal. I think you are faster with a clipless pedal. But what I am saying is that if we connect our shoes and our feet to the pedal with a rigid connection via a clipless pedal system, that tends to make us think that we should pull back and pull up. And what I'm saying is, let's push down, and let's make that pushing down occur predominantly from the glute and hamstring in conjunction with the quad at the front of the stroke. Again, as I referred to, this knee extension aspect of the pedal stroke. So, do you need a special shoe to pedal with a flat pedal on the bike? No, I don't think you do. What I think most of us will be able to do is to utilize a normal sneaker or shoe, Converse, Cons, or a minimalist type running shoe that has a thin midsole. The issue that could arise is we want to maintain the same basic fit on the bike, even though you're going to be pedaling on top of your pedal with a regular shoe. No reason to change pedals out. Obviously, if you're using a speed play, you're going to be a little bit more challenged because that's a very, very small base. But otherwise, a look style pedal, a time style pedal, the Keywinds, all of those pedals provide a nice base of support. So what you want is to maintain the same effective saddle height by making sure that the distance from the bottom of your foot to the pedal itself is the same whether or not you have the sneaker or flat pedal shoe or the clipless system that you're using. So you may have to play around and find an appropriate shoe to wear, but I think it could well work out that if you use a minimalist style shoe, that you get a similar distance between the two, and that should work pretty well. So play around with that. That's the one concern. You don't want to change your effective saddle height by changing the thickness of the sole as you go from a clipless system to a flat pedal or not clipped in system. So again, we're going to kind of ride like kids basically. We're going to get out there and get on our 3 speeds or our single speeds. We're not going to be clipped in, and we're just going to pedal that bike without being attached to it. And I think by doing that, we can basically train authentically on the bike. This is something that's absolutely sort of self-correcting. You don't have to think about it. If you're not connected to the pedal, you don't have to necessarily worry too much about where you're pulling or where you're not pulling, because you're not connected. So again, sort of a very authentic way to pedal the bike that I think will reinforce good mechanics in cycling. And if you can take some of the feeling that you have with that flat pedal and carry it over into your clipped in riding, then I think you'll get some real benefit from it. And I'm interested in your thoughts on that and how it works out for you. But that's what I'm thinking right now. Hope this makes sense, and I hope the video is helpful for you. If you have any questions, let me know. Ride safe. We'll see you soon.